Welcome to the Democratic primary candidate night for the position of State Representative for the 9th Bristol District, sponsored by the Dartmouth Democratic Town Committee. I'm Dr. James Griffith, chairperson of the Dartmouth Democratic Town Committee, and I will serve as moderator for this event. It is our purpose to provide information in the candidate's own words so as to inform voters as to their best choice for this important position. In order to facilitate this, we will use the following ground rules previously agreed to by each candidate. Each candidate will make an opening statement of not to exceed 3 minutes. Questions will be provided, already have been provided, by the audience in writing to a Dartmouth Democratic Town Committee volunteer. They will be screened for obscenities, inflammatory accusations, incivility, secret recipes, whatever. We're going to try and have an informative session here this evening. 3x5 cards have been distributed for the purpose of asking questions. Feel free to continue to ask questions. Just raise your hand and one of our volunteers will go pick the question up. All questions will be directed to each candidate by the moderator in an alternating sequence. Each candidate is going to answer all questions. There will be no direct interaction between the audience members and the candidates. Each response will be 2 minutes or less, 15-second time remaining warning, and then an annoying bell at the end of 2 minutes. I might allow a very brief follow-up reply for the candidate who first answers a question after the second person answers. And then each candidate will make a closing statement, 3 minutes as well. And if you are to be a questioner, you haven't already, please be as legible as possible. If I can't read it, it's not going to get asked. Okay. Our candidates for the Democratic primary for the 9th Bristol District are Representative Chris Markey and Mr. Cameron Costa. They're both here with us here this evening. And we will now begin with an opening statement from Chris Markey.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight. I think it's an important part of our process to make sure you understand where both of us stand on many of the issues that you are concerned with. I have always taken the position that I think government has 4 fundamental purposes, and that's to develop an infrastructure, to have a great education system, to have a community that's safe and that public safety is a key part of that, and finally that the people in the community are healthy. First, in regard to the infrastructure, when we look at the town of Dartmouth and what the town of Dartmouth and Greater New Bedford has done in regard to the infrastructure, we're not just talking about roadways, we're talking about bridges, talking about the harbor, talking about dredging of the harbor, building up new piers for the new industry that's going to come in that will be part of our infrastructure, our energy infrastructure, which is offshore wind. I think that that single-handedly is going to be the game changer for a great part of our economy in New Bedford, in Greater New Bedford and in Dartmouth. So the infrastructure is key, because if we don't have a good infrastructure in our community, we don't have people who are willing to make the private investment in our community. In order to have a good private investment into our community, we also have to have a good education system, where we have an educated workforce that can fulfill the jobs of offshore industry, offshore wind. Also work at high-end manufacturing that we hope to come at the Whaling City Golf Course, which is in the beginning development stages. So if we have an education system that develops a workforce, the private sector is willing to invest in that. If we have an infrastructure, the private sector is willing to invest in that. And finally, if we have safe neighborhoods, in which our justice system works and is fair, it doesn't have to be a system where there's antagonistic relationships between everybody. I know that they exist, and clearly in the last 2 years, it has been a huge problem. But I do think that we have a system that works, that needs fine-tuning, and we need to put people in those positions that matter and understand those. So if we have safe neighborhoods, good infrastructure, and an education system, probably the most fundamental thing is healthcare. We have to have the best healthcare. We do 55 miles away, but we do need to bring it further down south, to the South Coast. And I can tell you that the people at South Coast hospitals have done that. They have improved greatly over the last decade of their availability of people to get great care in our community without having to go to Boston. But all of this is great, and all of this is wonderful ideas that the government can assist in. But that's what our job is to assist the private sector. We are, as much as some people don't like it, we are a democratic, capitalistic society in which we need to have private sector investments in our community. And I hope I can explain some of those things over the course of the next hour to help you understand who I am and what I'm about.
Thank you. Mr. Costa.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Griffith, for hosting this event, as well as the rest of your team. I am extremely excited to be in front of all of you today to talk about our vision for the 9th Bristol District here. May I add the new 9th Bristol District, because it no longer includes parts of Ward 3, but Ward 1, precincts D, E, and F of the city of New Bedford. And I mention that because our district may have changed, but our problems are still the same here, right? Infrastructure. When we talk about infrastructure, we talk about, as Representative Markey said, right, the roads in our town, in our city. We talk about our bridges and how they've continued to be ignored by the state. When we talk about education, our teachers are not paid fair wages. Our kids are unable to learn because they're subjected to have to take the MCAS, and our teachers are required to focus on that. When we talk about the state's intervention in the infrastructure issues on Route 6, when we talk about their failures when it came to the environmental hazards at Bliss Corner, I'm running rather, because I want change here. I want change in the 9th Bristol District, and that starts with our leadership. We know that one single legislator is not going to solve our problems here. Our problems are going to be solved by bringing all of us together to figure out collaborative and creative solutions to these problems that we're all facing together, right? So I know that as I've been going door knocking, many people have recognized that I'm a very young face. And I think that's a compliment for most. So, but I sit before you as a proud graduate of Bristol Community College and UMass Dartmouth with degrees in business and history, as well as staying at UMass Dartmouth till December to graduate with my master's degree. I recognize that for some, being young may be a deterrent, but really it means that we have somebody that isn't tied to specific special interest and having to go the exact same route all the time. I'm running to be your candidate. I'm running to ensure that every single child has access to clean drinking water. I'm running to make sure that every single child has access to clean and safe schools, as well as making sure that they're not subjected anymore to these higher MCAS scores that they're trying to pass through our state. I'm running to make sure that everyone has access to economic stability. Thank you so much for having me here today, and I look forward to our conversation as we continue to talk about what's important here, what needs to be fixed, and how we're going to do it together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Cameron, you're also going to get the first question, and then Chris will go after you. The first question is, and you both will answer this question: where do you stand on improving access to and legal protections for reproductive health services for both Massachusetts and out-of-state residents?
Yes, this is an important question, as we all know, with the overturning of the Supreme Court case. I'm glad that certain legislators took bold action to pass the Roe Act and vote yes on that matter to make sure that all of our women have their own rights to choose. I'm also glad that the House recently voted to extend equity in our programs when it comes to making sure that women always have the right to choose. But I also recognize that I myself as a man will never have to know what that decision is like, that emotional decision of having to make your own choice. So I don't believe that it is my right as a man to essentially cast a vote that would be detrimental to women's health, to women's choice, to women's rights. Because as long as we have women in our district that are telling us that this is the right decision to have their own right to make their choice, I will always fight and advocate for you all. Because that's what's important in our district, is choice. And the moment that we start taking away individual rights like this, then we're going to have to be fearful about them taking other rights away. and we're not going to stand for that.
Thank you. I'm going to read the question again. Where do you stand on improving access to and legal protections for reproductive health services for both Massachusetts and out-of-state residents?
I'm for a woman's right to choose. I have supported, and not only did I support, but I helped marshal through when I was a young representative as a chairman of judiciary, the buffer zone bill that was flipped by the Supreme Court about 8 years ago. I was the legislator who marshaled in, who listened to all the amendments, who went through and made sure that it passed. I was there yesterday to make sure that we passed the expansion of reproductive rights for people who are not only in our Commonwealth, but for outside. Those are things that are incredibly important to me. But the fact is that we're going to have to deal with a lot more of these issues over the course of the next 2 decades because of the horrific decisions that the Supreme Court has made and will continue to make over the next decade or so. The fact that Griswold is up for grabs. The fact that Lawrence, a case out of Texas that talks about intimate relationships and who you can have an intimate relationships with, who you can marry and who you can love. Those are all questions that are going to end up on our state, in the hands of our state legislators. But I don't think it should be just left to the state legislator because those are individual rights. And those individual rights should be in the Constitution, not just in legislation, because God only knows what happened in the Supreme Court, and putting it in the hands of a legislature that can change at any moment. We need to make sure that those individual rights stay within the Constitution of Massachusetts. So I'm for women's right to choose. I think it's an important right. It's one that should be in the Constitution, not just legislative. I also believe in the other matters that I mentioned before, who you can marry and who you can love, who you can have an intimate relationship with. Those are important rights for a woman to have.
Cameron?
Yes, I just wanted to make one clarifying thing quickly. I think it is kind of misleading to essentially state that you are pro-woman and women's choice when you voted no on the Roe Act, which codified a woman's right to choose in the Massachusetts Constitution.
No, first off, it doesn't codify it in the Constitution. So that's a very elementary part of this. It's a legislative act. And the Roe Act expanded it to minor children. And I didn't believe that people under the age of 18, minors, should be able to get an abortion without parental consent or judicial intervention. And let me tell you, the judicial intervention works. There's a special group of female Superior Court judges. And if you ask anyone in the court system, the Superior Court in Massachusetts is the pinnacle superior trial court in the country. These women sit down with a minor and discuss their options. I think that that's an important part. I don't believe that they should be able to do that on their own. That's the reason why I voted against the Roe Act. It had nothing to do with a child's choice. It had to do with a woman's choice. And the women, if it was only women, I would agree. But when it's a child, I couldn't even have my children be looked at by a dentist without my consent. Why should we have children getting abortions without their parents' consent? Now, I know that there are parents and children relationships that are difficult, but that's why you have judicial intervention. And those safeguards were always there in the Commonwealth. They were codified long before. Roe expanded it to the minor children, and a little bit longer in time, which wasn't an issue with me, but the minor children I had an issue with, and that's why I didn't vote for it.
Okay, that was a little longer than
I'm
it should have
sorry.
been, but Representative Markey, you're also going to get the first shot at the second question, which is, where do you stand on raising the minimum wage to $17 or $18 and indexing it to the cost of living?
This is the first I've heard of $17, but I know that the $15 passed, and I think that we need to keep an eye on it. To say immediately that I would be for a $17 increase or an increase to $17 for the minimum wage, I don't know if economically that is the most viable thing to do. But I do think that we need to continue to grow that. It's not something that is stagnant. And if we were to start at the $15 and grow with inflation and grow with CPI, I think that makes sense. But the idea of just going up to $17 immediately after we have done approximately a 25% increase over the last 5 years, I think would be difficult for some of the small businesses. So in regard to going up to $17 or $18, I'm not sure that that is the most effective way to grow our small businesses to a point where we can employ people. So I do believe, though, that that needs to continue to grow with how the economy grows and how the prices grow.
Thank you. Mr. Costa, I will read it again. Where do you stand on raising the minimum wage to $17 or $18 and indexing it to the cost of living?
Yes, this is an important question. As we know, it's not just young people that have to depend on minimum wage here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and in the South Coast. It's many people, right? People that didn't have access to high school diplomas, people that didn't have access to furthering their education because of barriers that are in place for them, right? I believe it was a report put out last year by MIT that calculated the living wage rate right now in Massachusetts to be just over $17. Now, obviously, with inflation, that is probably completely false and is probably needed to be a lot higher, right? I recognize the importance of also having to index it as, we as individuals that work off of a wage, we don't get to kind of make different chances at where we can make cuts or where we have to get a second job. So I am for raising the minimum wage and making sure that it is at a livable wage rate for people, so that way they're able to create generational wealth, so that way they're able to have more opportunities when it comes to going to colleges and furthering their education. But it also means supporting our small businesses. We can do a lot more at the state level to support our small businesses to ensure that they have access to be able to provide this type of wage to people.
Thank you very much. You're now going to get the first shot at the next question. Please share how you will support the public schools in regards to fair contracts, health, and insurance relief. Will you pledge to work with educators and families for strong public schools?
Yes, sorry, that was a lot. I was just trying to make sure I got all of it. Education is one of the most important things. When it came to having to deal with COVID-19, one of the best ways that we were able to vaccinate our population was by education, making sure that people understood it was safe. That also means that we need to promote our educational institutions here, our schools, K through 12, our pre-K, right? That starts by passing the Common Start Bill, making sure that our early educators have access to fair wages, making sure that our kids have access to equity when it comes to our pre-K schools or services, right? I am all for our teachers here. I recognize the work that they do. They've uplifted me to be the person that I am today. And if it wasn't for some of my teachers, then I probably wouldn't be sitting here in this seat today talking to all of you. That's what's important. We need to make sure that we're listening to our educators and what their needs are, right? I do not believe that any educator should have to pay out of their own personal pocket to fund for school supplies for their students. That's our job as a state legislator. Not my job yet, but but it's also about making sure that we're working with our unions, right? We recognize, and unions recognize, it's called a negotiation process. Both sides know that they're not going to get every single thing that they want. But without our educators, our children wouldn't have education. So it's also important that we make sure that we work with them to have equitable access to affordable health care. Not 50%, not 65%. They should be under the same stipulation of any other state employee with 75% employer-paid health care. That's what I believe. I believe in our educators because they do right by our children every single day. And from talking to parents from across this district, I know that many of them said they were so glad when our kids were able to go back in school because they just couldn't deal with them anymore. But our educators do. So it's about sticking by them and making sure that we're doing what's right by them.
Thank you very much. Representative Markey, I'll read it again. Please share how you will support the public schools in regards to fair contracts, health, and insurance relief. Will you pledge to work with educators and families for strong public schools?
Absolutely will pledge to that. And not only will I pledge to it, I've pledged to it and voted for it. back in 2011, in November of 2011, when we voted to put all towns and municipalities in the GIC program if they negotiated it themselves and gave them the option. Dartmouth hasn't done it. I'm perplexed by why they haven't done it, quite frankly. When we have people who are working in our schools that are basically working there just to get by to get their health insurance. It's not right, it's not fair. And I have had conversations with people about this, whether they'll be on the school committee or be the attorneys. I feel like it is an important part of giving quality education to our children is to make sure that we have quality teachers. Years ago, young people wanted to be teachers in Dartmouth because the pay was good and the environment was fantastic. People are leaving the Dartmouth school system because the pay is still okay. The problem is they're paying so much for health insurance that they want to leave and they can go somewhere else. I'm a legislator. I'm not a lawyer for the school department. I'm not a lawyer for the union. That's their job. That's their job. A legislator is to provide them the tools available to do those things. We've done that. We did it 10 years ago. We provided them the opportunity to get into a lower rate, lower cost healthcare system in which they could be able to survive and have that pay. We did that already. I will continue to do that. I don't need to get out in front of everybody and scream and yell. I think that it's way more productive to be able to have private conversations, to get people together and build those relationships and try to make a difference that way. But as far as providing the best education for our children, obviously I want that because it goes back to my fundamental principle of developing those four things of infrastructure, education, public safety, and healthcare.
Thank you very much. You're also going to get the first shot at the next question. Where do you stand on term limits for the Speaker of the House?
I'm against it. I think it's one of the most undemocratic things you can do. If you think they're doing a good job, you vote for them. If you think they're doing a bad job, you vote them out. Why would we do anything else? Some arbitrary number for the people who are on the losing side so they can try next time to get into leadership? Let me tell you, I lost my leadership position. I lost money because I stood up to leadership. Yet I still voted against this because it is simply, if we're the Democratic Party, let's be democratic. If you think someone's doing a great job, keep them in there. And I will tell you, Speaker DeLeo did a great job. He was able to take a balance between all of the interests of people and listen to them and provide great policy for us. That's an important part of this job, is to build those relationships and not alienate people. And I think that that's one of the qualities I have, is to build those relationships and talk to people from all different walks of life who don't agree with me and who do agree with me. But the idea that a speaker has a short time frame is preposterous. And if the argument is well, you control the leadership, you pay him money, you do that stuff. Well, shame on the people who vote for him for that reason. I'm not one of them. I can tell you right now, I'm the one who lost $15,000 a year because I stood up to him.
Thank you very much. I will read the question again, Mr. Costa. Where do you stand on term limits for the Speaker of the House?
Simple, I support it. I think that it is, Representative Markey makes fair arguments, right? When we talk about how putting in term limits for some people or for the speaker in this instance is essentially just a waste of time and energy from the state. But I think we also have to recognize, right, we're talking about, he mentions Speaker DeLeo and how he did a great job in balancing the interest of all people. But what if we have a Speaker of the House that doesn't, right? Of course, there are people that are not going to vote for them because they have higher morale, yes, they have higher morals, thank you, God. They have higher morals, but we also have to recognize that not every single legislator takes that stance to be a balance of all interests and to all people, right? We recognize that. It's the reason why certain legislators, when they've been in office for too long, will act only in their own interests and rather than in the people that they're supposed to be representing. That's why we need speaker term limits. Because while I understand how putting short terms on people in their powerful position of being Speaker of the House, at their end of that term, they're still going to be going back to being a legislator. And they had all that time to build those connections with all of those legislators from across our state to still be able to try and push forward their legislation. So while I understand the arguments of keeping our speaker term limits, I think we also have to recognize that we don't elect the Speaker of the House as the people in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Our legislators do. And while we do put full faith and trust in our legislators, sometimes they don't act in the best interest of the people.
I just say, I can't ask for term limits when I'm not subject to term limits. I don't think it's right. I don't think it's fair. And if the people who elect you and you make the wrong decision because it's going to be in your financial interest, then you shouldn't have the job.
Cameron?
Yes, I think it's one thing to talk about, right, just speaker term limits, but I also am in favor of supporting term limits for our legislators. So that way, when we're not doing a right job as a legislator, people can not have to only depend on voting us out. We know, right, that there's an incumbency advantage. We all recognize that. We've all learned it. So it's about making sure that we're working hard for the people.
Can I just, if we didn't have, Bill Strauss is a representative from Fairhaven or Mattapoisett. He's been there for about 32 years. And he single-handedly was the one who got us South Coast Rail. If he was gone 20 years ago, we wouldn't have it. And the people of Mattapoisett and Fairhaven and Marion would be represented by someone else. And Tony Cabral has been there for 32 years. And Mark Montigny has been there for 30 years. We have represented by people. I've only been there for 12 years. But the idea is the people should vote who they want in there, and we shouldn't limit that.
Okay, Mr. Costa, next question. What is your policy for policing in the following areas in Dartmouth? Schools, traffic control, domestic cases, use of weapons, training programs.
Sorry, I just want to make
Can
sure.
you repeat that list again?
What is your policy for policing in the following areas in Dartmouth? Schools, traffic control, domestic cases, use of weapons, training programs.
Sorry, I was just trying to get that list down. I think it's very clear, right? The state has already made their position on what they believe to be the best case of action when it comes to policing in our schools by putting that power back into our local elected school committees and superintendents. So I think it's really about working with and supporting our schools on whatever decision it is that they make to ensure that they have whatever they need to make sure that our kids are safe in school. When it comes to traffic, I think we can work with our police departments and our police unions specifically to make sure that we're creating equitable ways for other people to have the opportunity to handle traffic concerns. I recognize that wasn't a favorable thing when Deval Patrick was governor, but I think that we can revisit that issue so that way we can create more job opportunities here on the South Coast with flaggers. They do it in other states. We can do it here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, working with our unions. When it comes to domestic cases, I believe that we need more diversion clinicians in our police departments. Right? We know that our social workers have specialized training to deal with domestic disputes as they deal with it almost every single day, right? New Bedford was one of the first cities in this area, and I believe probably close to the entire state, to have a program similar to the diversion program. We need more social workers in our police departments. Of course, if we have a police officer there to handle a situation, clear a situation before we bring a social worker in, then that's what I'm for, right? We need to make sure it's safe because the social worker is not going to be carrying a gun with them. But they do carry a special set of skills that they are trained and have to go through hundreds of hours doing, so that way they're able to handle that situation. When it comes to training programs, I apologize, I'm not exactly sure what that exactly means, but I know that at least under the police bill that was passed, the police reform bill that was passed close to almost 2 years ago or last year, our officers get more training now, and it's important that we continue that.
Okay, Chris, I know you heard me read this twice, but I'm going to read
No,
it
I'm good.
again.
I'm good. I got the list.
Okay? All right.
You don't
go.
need to go through it. So in regard to the schools, I think that the school resource officers provide an incredible value to our school system. One is it just assures people. I mean, literally, the next building over, 1993 or 1992, there was a murder in our high school. I was one of the assistant DAs who was helping out on the prosecution of that case. I had just become a lawyer, and I second-seated Tom Quinn on it. I know that the school resource officers since then have provided great resources, not only to the students as a place to talk to, but also for the police officers to prevent crimes in the future. They gather intelligence. They understand things and who's hanging out with who and what's up going on, so that when they go to the mall, they'll have a sense of who's who and what's going on. The idea of traffic is not the highest priority in my book as a state representative. That's something for the guys who sit here every other Monday in the selectmen to make those decisions, and I'm not going to interfere with that. But I will say this: we have a domestic violence law that's pretty significant and pretty important to protect the victim of a domestic violence case. And I'm sorry to say, but in all cases, I think it's great to have mental health people go to those locations, not necessarily domestics. If you ask any police officer with any experience, they're going to say domestic violence cases are the most volatile. They never know what's going to happen. But there are many cases, and it wasn't, and New Bedford was way after the loop on having counselors in the cruiser. Framingham did it 12 years ago because I went up to the Framingham Police Department to speak with the chief and to talk about it. Somerville Police, same thing. They did it before. Cambridge, they've been doing it for a decade now, and it's a great thing. As far as the training, we have one of, I think, the best young police chiefs there is in the state with Brian Levesque. He has done a tremendous job, and I've talked to him about training and what they're doing differently, and spoken many times about the police reform bill with him in getting some guidance in regard to that. And I am very satisfied with the town of Dartmouth in their training, but it always, as with everything, with the practice of law, you got to keep practicing and you got to keep training. So I hope we continue to do that and fund that with the funding we've done already.
Next question's for you again. Republicans are already trying to repeal the Family Mobility Act. Where do you stand on driver's licenses for undocumented people?
I will say this: I am not for the change of it, but I was not in favor of it. And I say this because I don't believe that that is something that is for a petition to do. I don't think the citizens should petition for something that's been debated and litigated. Not only, it only happened within the last 3 months. We don't even know how it will affect, and it hasn't even taken effect until January. But I'm not for it. And the reason why I'm not for it is because I know many immigrants who have come here legally, who have come here with the proper documentation, to be able to go through the line and go through the process, to have the privilege of having a driver's license. There are many immigrants who can get a license, but they have to be here properly. That would be a student visa. In fact, we had a student at our house for a year, a young Frenchman who was a Muslim who stayed, and we got him into driver's ed, and we began the process for him to be able to get his license because he had a student visa. I'm for that if they're here legally, but it's a privilege. And why should the people who don't have the proper documentation to be here get that privilege? Now, I know the practical side of things, and I've experienced it and I've seen it, but I don't buy into the public safety aspect of this. Because we all have licenses, but we all see people driving recklessly. A license doesn't mean that it's all of a sudden everyone's going to drive properly. But it is a privilege, and the courts have said it's a privilege, and it's a license that requires you to be here as a proper citizen or proper resident. And I believe in that until the federal government changes it, which I'm totally for. Trust me, if people have worked here for 5 years and paid taxes and worked, they should become citizens. I have no problem with that, and if I was a congressman, I would push for it and ask for it and fight for it. But as far as being here properly, they have to be here properly before they could get a license.
Okay, Cameron, same question. Republicans are already trying to repeal the Family Mobility Act. Where do you stand on driver's licenses for undocumented people?
Yes, I've actually was approached recently about signing the ballot initiative to change that, in which I didn't sign it, because as Representative Markey's colleague, Rep. Paul Schmid, said, that he worked extremely hard with a lot of the chiefs in his neighboring towns to make sure that this piece of legislation was going to be secured. As a matter of fact, he said that that's why he voted no originally, so that way they could prevent some of the loopholes that would have allowed for undocumented immigrants that don't have documentation or official documentation. It's clear that there's a problem down in DC. Everybody recognizes that, especially as Representative Markey said, it's a problem. But just because there's a problem in DC doesn't mean that we can't act here in Massachusetts. We've led on a number of different issues here. Why can't we lead on this one, right? So for me, I would have voted yes on that piece of legislation because there were chiefs of police all across this Commonwealth that were talking about how, of course, public safety is their number one concern, but how this bill wasn't essentially going to decrease public safety. Obviously, people have licenses and they still get into car accidents. The point of this bill was to make sure that people would be protected when it came to having insurance on their vehicles, so that way people wouldn't be more inclined to just flee accidents or flee the crime scenes, right? That was the point of this bill. The point of this bill was to make sure that everybody did have more safety. And after they went up for it for a couple of different votes, but after the final bill came to the legislator's desk, it included pieces that made sure that people were required to submit official documentation.
Okay. Next question is for you. What do you plan to do to support the agricultural industry, especially its importance for the Dartmouth Master Plan?
Yes. First, I just want to say I'll be completely honest. I haven't started looking at the Dartmouth Master Plan yet. And that is my fault, but after this, I'm definitely going to be looking into it, so thank you for letting me know about that. Secondly, when we're talking about agriculture, we understand its importance here in Dartmouth, but we also recognize that it's important when it comes to the city of New Bedford. I had the opportunity to work with the Costa Food Shed, which main purpose was to bring local food into the city of New Bedford to try and get rid of our food deserts in the city. That's a program that's worth fighting for, right? Making sure that our farmers have access to different routes to get their food across this regional economy here in the South Coast. I also believe in pulling together a bunch of farmers to understand what are the needs that they have, right? I'm not a farmer, right? I've never been a farmer. I've always wanted to be one, but I never had the chance. But I did have the opportunity to work on the YMCA farm and recognize that it is difficult work. So we need to be pulling together our farmers from across this district to make sure that we're able to understand what their needs are and to make sure that we're including that in the Dartmouth Master Plan. But also, right, it's about how are we making sure that we're creating pathways for new farmers to come about. We're talking about affordable housing, right? Many farmers, it's easier for them to be able to plow their land when it comes to them having a house on that land. But most of the times they can't afford a house on land. So it's about increasing our resources for the Dartmouth Natural Resource Trust, so that way they can work on making sure that our farmers have access to cheap land. I believe it's $0 or $1 a year now, where as long as they are willing to plow that land. So it's about increasing our resources for organizations like that work hard for our farmers, that make sure that there's access to bring up this new generation of farmers, but also making sure that our farmers have access to money, to new technologies that are going to make their jobs easier and make sure that they can get more local food sourced in the city of New Bedford, the town of Dartmouth, and throughout our region here.
Thank you very much. Representative Markey, what do you plan to do to support the agricultural industry, especially its importance for the Dartmouth Master Plan?
This is one of the things that I'm probably most proud of. When I first ran in 2010, one of the first people I talked to was Fred Dabney, who then put me in touch with Sue Garducci, and I spent 4 hours speaking with Sue about the importance of farming in New Bedford, or really Dartmouth, but how it affects New Bedford. And we talked about everything from portable meat manufacturing places to how the farmers work, how the APL works. And I think it was those hours I spent in following up and asking questions of the farmers, who are an integral part of Dartmouth, is why I believe in 2014 I was Legislator of the Year for the Farm Bureau, because of the activity that I had with Buying Local, which provides grants to local farmers and local, like CMAP, where they provide technical assistance to local farmers who don't have those abilities. I have assisted with the preservation of land for agricultural purposes. I have been on the front edge on every session that I have participated in on agricultural issues. And it is probably the most important economic engine for Dartmouth outside of Route 6 is the farming. And you could talk to Derek Christensen, who has a farm right up next to the high school, and how he does that, and the CSAs, and how we support the CSAs. That is an important part of who we are in Dartmouth. And I think that I have provided great service to the farmers, given them opportunities to sell their product in New Bedford, where I've gone down and purchased things in front of the library or down in the square. But also, I've provided monies for the meatpacking plant that's in Westport and got that developed with private sector money and working in those private conversations and making sure we had grant money for them. So farming is an essential part, and I am glad of my record on the farming in this area.
Thank you very much. This is Representative Markey, where do you stand on permitting municipalities to impose rent controls?
The idea of rent control, I am not in favor of, because I don't think our housing project problems, which is huge, is addressed in a one-way system. Housing is an enormous problem because of supply and demand. It's an enormous problem because people cannot afford to buy a house because they can't put a down payment on. And Cameron talked about generational wealth. Generational wealth isn't increased by the minimum wage. It's not at all. It gets you a better life, but it doesn't create generational wealth. Going from $15 to $17 or $18 isn't going to get you to buy a house. But what's going to get you to buy a house is help from the government in which we can subsidize a down payment. Down payment subsidies is the way in which you can get people out of rentals to move into homes that they own. And when they move into a home that they can own, the people who own that first home, and I can tell you, I've sent my kids, 2 of them to college, 1's in college, because I own a home. That's the only reason how I can do it. It's because I can borrow off of that home. That's what creates generational wealth. And the people can move up, and the people who are renting then become homeowners. That's the way it works. You can't have everyone be a renter, and you can't have the way in which we continue to go, where we have the haves and the have-nots in housing. And until we create that supply along the way and we make it available, the rents will continue to grow to a point where people cannot afford the rents, and the government can't continue to subsidize it. So it's a whole approach in which you're going to need help affordable housing, help with down payment first-time home buyers, help with the zoning, that's just a huge obstacle in which we've worked on, and I could explain later, but it's a very technical issue, but it definitely is something that is massively involved with every aspect of municipal government.
Thank you. Cameron, where do you stand on permitting municipalities to impose rent controls?
Yes, I am in favor of allowing our municipalities and towns to make whatever decision that they believe is best. And if that means imposing rent control to allow for more affordable housing in our communities, then that's a decision that's going to be made at the local level. Similar to how Representative Markey talked about how traffic is for the people that sit up here on this bench. Well, I also believe that rent control is a problem or is a issue that needs to be talked about behind this bench. But that can't happen without our legislators allowing our municipalities and towns to do that. So that's what I'm in favor of, is making sure that we have that option for people. And of course, it is a multifaceted plan. You can't just say rent control is going to be the number one solution to this problem of affordable housing, because we also need to talk about eviction rates. Eviction rates in Bristol County were close to 38% last year, meaning that we had one of the highest eviction rates in the entire Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And we talk about how even in that essence, right, people who are evicted from their own homes or from their own apartments don't have access to a person that is going to represent them in a court of law. So we need to talk about addressing that issue as well when it comes to affordable housing. And of course, we talk about how in order to create more affordable housing units, we also need to increase our building when it comes to creating those units. For example, I'm glad to see that the Waterfront Historic League in the city of New Bedford was able to get funding to create more affordable housing units with an old firehouse. Right, so it's about looking at these old infrastructure buildings, getting more state support and state funding to ensure that we're able to create from our old buildings to create new forms of housing for people. Housing is the number one issue that everybody recognizes as a problem, because if somebody doesn't have a secure home, then they're not going to have access to make sure that they have mental health services. They're going to be worrying about whether or not they're going to have food at night, right? And that can't happen if somebody doesn't have a home. So of course I support the programs that allow for down payment assistance, but it's also about increasing that for our middle class so that way they too can also get support in putting a down payment on a home, not just low income families. We need to make sure that we're coming full circle for everyone.
Thank you very much. You get the next question as well. In view of the statements and reports of the Massachusetts Attorney General, judges, the Department of Homeland Security, and the Department of Health that Sheriff Thomas Hodgson has violated the Constitution, state laws, and regulations in his years of managing the Bristol County House of Correction facilities, what is your role as an elected state official to inspect and initiate actions to remedy this situation?
Oh, I love this question. So first I'd like to say I would work very hard with our I'm going to forget their name and I apologize so much, but for the people that are working to get some justice for a lot of families in our Bristol County Corrections. And Marlene's sitting right there. She's going to kill me because I'm forgetting the name. For correctional justice. Thank you, Marlene. So making sure, right, that we're working to make sure that there are safe conditions in all of our jail systems, right? Making sure that that's a priority. One of the things that Hodgson that was doing, and I'm glad to see there was action taken or trying to be taken on making sure that phone calls were free for our inmates in our prisons. I know and recognize, I believe it was a couple of years ago when a certain state senator had tried to enter the prison system in Bristol County, they were denied access, which I believe, and if I'm not mistaken, every legislator has the right to access a prison facility so that way they can provide some kind of oversight into our prison systems. And when that access is not granted, then I believe that's a violation of law. Nothing really came about that. So I think it's about creating common ways to work with people in our prison system, to work with agencies like Marlene stated, to really try and figure out a creative and collaborative way to hold our elected officials accountable, right? I think we would all try and hold our legislators accountable. So it's about working with the people to understand what those problems are and trying to hold, if it's Sheriff Hodgson today, if it's another sheriff after this election, making sure that we're holding each and every single elected official accountable.
Thank you. Representative Markey, in view of the statements and reports of the Massachusetts Attorney General, judges, the Department of Homeland Security, and the Department of Public Health that Sheriff Thomas Hodgson has violated the Constitution, state laws, and regulations in his years of managing the Bristol County House of Correction facilities, what is your role as an elected state official to inspect and initiate actions to remedy this situation?
Well, there's a few things we're to do. And I think one is make sure that financially the monies are being appropriated in the appropriate way. And I think that's one of our primary responsibilities as a legislator, particularly in the House of Representatives, to make sure that the money is being spent properly. There are lots of questions in regard to that. That's why even before COVID, I was supporting the idea of free phone calls for individuals. The contracts that were generated by not just the Bristol County Sheriff, but by every sheriff and in the Department of Corrections. It was obscene. And I can tell you, I've been to both facilities in the last 6 months in regard to the Ash Street facility as well as the Fonts Corner Road facility. And I have seen how it is a facility where I would want the Attorney General to take legal action. I would want us to find ways in which the court was the mechanism to do that. And I think the voices of people in Bristol County, mostly because of people who are in this room, I think may change the way in which Bristol County Sheriff's Office is run come January of 2023. And I think that is the fact that we need to look at is, right now he is the elected official, and there are things that I definitely disagree with him on, without a doubt. But ultimately, he's the elected official, and in November is the time in which we can make a change of that. But if he continues to be the sheriff, we need to find ways to make sure that people are safe. And again, 99% of the people who are going into the House of Correction are going to get out. We want to make sure that programming is proper and audited and made sure that there's results. We did that with the Criminal Justice Reform Bill and making sure that the programming in both the Houses of Correction and the Department of Corrections are audited to make sure that their money is worthwhile in the program that they're doing. And I would continue to do that.
Thank you. Next question is for you as well. Where do you stand on replacing Columbus Day with Indigenous Peoples Day?
I think we should.
That was brief.
I don't have a problem with it.
Cameron, where do you stand on replacing Columbus Day with Indigenous Peoples Day?
I also think we should. So that was an easy question, I think, for us both.
Okay, Cameron, again. Due to climate change and usage, Dartmouth appears to be running out of water. What do you plan on doing to make water distribution fair to all across the state?
Yes, and I know that this was a very important issue for a lot of residents in the town of Dartmouth, as it was a constant theme throughout the town meeting back in June, sorry, we're not even in July yet. But right, we recognize that that's a problem here in the town of Dartmouth. I believe they increased the budget from 600 and something thousand to 700 and something thousand to continue to buy water from the city of New Bedford to be able to fuel their own uses of water. I agree with the town of Dartmouth putting in a ban from using an excessive amount of water during the day, so that way we're able to reserve as much water as possible, so that way it is an equitable process for every single resident in the town of Dartmouth. I will be completely honest, I am not 100% familiar about the best ways in conserving water and distributing them to residents throughout our community, but that's why we have people that are experts, people that understand what policies work in our Department of Public Works here in this town of Dartmouth and in the city of New Bedford. So that way we can work on making sure that there is equity in addressing this issue, because water is a common thing that we all need to survive. So it's making sure that we're creating policies and creating legislation that's going to really support making sure that there's an equal distribution of water between everybody in the state. We here in the South Coast are not lucky to have access to the Quabbin out in central Western Mass, but I think that there's also ways to create opportunities for us to look at creating water solutions here in the town of Dartmouth and in the city of New Bedford.
Thank you very much. And Representative Markey, due to climate change and usage, Dartmouth appears to be running out of water. What do you plan on doing to make water distribution fair to all across the state?
I think you have to look at where the real issues are And then you have to address it in a way in which the regulations are imposed. And the way to do that is, much of what Cameron had just mentioned is to leave it to the experts in that regard, but you have to set policy, not only policy on water usage, but the environment. For example, I spent 2 hours on the phone this week talking about regulations for Title V septic issues that are going to be coming out, and they're going to be huge burdens on homeowners, potentially. And how do you do that when there's a drinking well right there and there's issues that can cause nitrogen to get into the drinking water? Those are issues that you deal with every day in a state rep job, but you never thought you would show up and listen to. But it is something that, again, you have to look at big policy issues and how water runoff in farming areas, how nitrogen is affecting private wells, where we can obtain water from other locations. I mean, the idea that we're buying water is not great, but Taunton, New Bedford, I mean, we've got land, New Bedford has land in Lakeville to be able to supply water to their town or to the city. Those are all things that you have to look at, and you have to make sure that, again, you adjust and you're flexible and you're nimble as a representative to be able to figure out solutions to that. And I think, quite frankly, when it gets to a point where it has become unconscionable as how we deal with the water, if it becomes to a point where we are totally out of water, we will have solutions well before that. But it's, again, building the relationships and talking to the people at the water department, talking to the DPW, talking to DEP, and making sure that there's solutions that we have safe water. Because I am telling you right now, in the town of Dartmouth and other parts of southeastern Massachusetts, in the fall, we will be dealing with regulatory changes to our Title V issues.
Thank you very much. That ends our question phase, and we will now have the 3-minute closing statements by agreement. The first one for Mr. Costa.
Yes, thank you once again, Dr. Griffith, for having us here today to be able to talk to people, to get our visions out there. I really was keen and in favor of you calling this a candidate conversation rather than a debate, because that's what's missing in today's political climate. It's a conversation between elected officials and a conversation between the representatives and the people that they're seeking to represent. I'm running because I'm trying to continue these conversations for all of us here today, past today. Before I announced this campaign, I spoke to as many people as possible, from elected officials to former elected officials, even bugging people at Scuttlebutts and Java Shack so that way I could understand that me making this decision of running was not just something that I made up on my own, but was something that was brought to me by a couple of different people. And that's why I ran. I ran because I wanted to have these conversations with people. And we've continued these conversations since announcing on April 7th. We've knocked on over 1,500 doors, from Sassaquin Pond to Pittanarum to all over this district, all the way up to Old Fall River Road in North Dartmouth. We're working hard so that way we can get our vision out there for people, but also so that way we can listen, so that way we can understand how these problems are still happening in our district today, from water issues, from the MCAS in our schools, from the crumbling infrastructure. We need somebody that is going to address these issues, as they've been constant issues for many, many years. Many people have asked me in these conversations what makes myself different from Representative Markey, which is a fair question considering we're running against an incumbent. What makes me different from Representative Markey is I'm willing to continue these conversations. I'm willing to door knock every single door. Ask his neighbors. I door knocked over there. I'm willing to make phone calls at late night. We've made over 300 phone calls to constituents across this district because your conversations, your issues, are my issues. It's time that we have somebody who is going to fight for all of you, making sure that we're balancing between Dartmouth and New Bedford to make sure that every single person in both districts, or the entire district, has a representative that's willing to have those conversations, even when it's somebody that doesn't have the same political ideology as you. Difficult conversations. So I want to leave you with one simple thing. I will always show up for you. I will always fight for you. I just need you to show up and cast your vote for Cameron Costa on September 6th. Thank you so much for allowing me to be here today. I hope once this is over, we can have some conversations with everyone. And please make sure to get out and vote. Thank you so much.
And Representative Markey. No? Representative Markey.
Thank you, Jim, for having the opportunity to be here to discuss these things. I find it a little bit disturbing that somehow I don't fight for you. I have sat down with individuals who are sitting in this room face to face numerous times to talk about issues that they have and talk about policies that they believe in. And some of them have convinced me to change my mind on things, and some of them have not. I have met with hundreds of people individually to talk about issues in our district and in our Commonwealth. I continuously do that. The difference is I don't tweet it every day. I don't put it on Facebook every day. I don't believe that social media is the answer to a new political ideal. Government works when it's consistent, when it's in the background, when it's there when you need it, but it's reliable for the people who invest in it and invest in their community. If it's not consistent, if we don't continue to grow in incremental ways, in a cumulative fashion, and expand the things that we want to do, we will begin to be like DC. But over the course of 12 years, when you look at what I have invested in the ideas that I have invested in, offshore wind, a new industrial park, a new causeway in Paid-Narrow, Bliss Corner, which I had no responsibility for and no one neglected. It was found because two developers who I met with individually, who I spoke with individually, explained their dilemma. And we began the process of trying to clean it up. And it's heart-wrenching to go to Bliss Corner and see that and know the people who are in that area. So the idea somehow that I'm responsible or the government in this day and age is responsible for that is not true. We're trying to clean it up. And I've had dozens of hours of conversations with DEP and EPA and Congressman Keating's office and Senator Markey's office to try to get funding to help people so that this will happen. So every day I have conversations with people. The only difference is I don't post what I do every day. I always say to people, do you think a plumber, every time he installs a toilet, needs to take a picture with the toilet? Is that what we're up to now in politics? It's not. It's about going out and making a real difference and having real conversations with people where they feel comfortable that they can talk to you. I believe people feel comfortable talking to me. They might not agree with me, but at least they can talk to me. Thank you very much. Vote Markey September 6th.
Thank you very much. I would like to express the appreciation of the Dartmouth Democratic Town Committee to each of our candidates for coming tonight. This is not an easy thing to do, to answer questions as wide ranges as we had, so our appreciation to both of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. Hey, great job. Great job.
I'd also like to thank the Dartmouth Democratic Town Committee volunteers, if they could raise their hands or faint or something. And Dartmouth Community Television, who has recorded this. It will be on Dartmouth Channel 18 starting Sunday at 9 a.m., again at 7 p.m., Saturday at 4 p.m., Wednesday at 9 p.m., Monday at 2 p.m., and after that you can get it on demand at dartmouthtv.com. So I appreciate them getting the word out beyond this group. And finally, my personal appreciation to all of you who took the time to come. You have expressed what is important and needed in good government by being here, and the spectacular questions that we have had. So I thank all of you, the audience. Thank you.